I found it inside a dented holiday popcorn tin, the one my mother gave me years ago, buried under a stale layer of caramel corn that had turned to lollipop hard. My son had tossed it in the trash like it was garbage, a relic no one needed anymore. He was spectacularly wrong. That tin held the original notarized 50-50 partnership agreement that would unravel his entire $650,000 betrayal, void a corporate snack empire's acquisition, and put him right back in my shop, stirring a 200-pound copper kettle in a neon yellow shirt that reads "Pop Goes the Lies," while every single bag of popcorn we sell prints his perjury docket number for the whole world to see. My name is Martha Voss, and I spent 34 years as an intensive care nurse at St. Jude's Regional. You learn a lot of things watching people fight for their lives. You learn how to read a monitor in your peripheral vision, how to spot a decimal point error in a medication drip before it kills someone, how to keep a poker face when a family is circling like the patient is already a line item in a will. I thought I had seen every flavor of human greed, but I'd never seen it in my own son until the day he handed me a $5,000 check and told me my life's savings had been a gift to his ambition. My son Derek is 32, a handsome man with an easy laugh and a smile that would make a loan shark hand over his own wallet. He married Tanya, a woman whose entire personality was her Instagram grid. She measured everything in aesthetic value, including people. After my husband passed from a heart attack 12 years ago, Derek became my whole world. I'm not going to pretend I was a perfect mother, but I showed up. I worked double shifts to pay for his braces, his baseball camps, his community college business classes that he never quite finished. And when he came to me 3 years ago with a binder full of flavor profiles and a dream of opening a gourmet popcorn shop, I did what any mother who still believed in her boy would do. I liquidated my entire nursing pension. $120,000, every cent earmarked for my quiet little retirement of gardening and library books. I handed it over because he called it Pop's Kernels in memory of his father, and I cried right there at the kitchen table. We sat down at the same bank where I'd cashed that pension check months later and notarized a 50-50 partnership agreement. I insisted on it. He said sweetly, "Mom, it's just a formality. You know I'll take care of you." And I smiled and said, "I know, but I'll feel better with it on paper." My own mother, Elaine, had been a legal secretary for 40 years before she retired, and she'd always told me, "Martha, a handshake is a nice gesture, but a notary stamp holds up in court." So we signed 2 originals. The notary, an old woman named Mrs. Pendleton, who had known me since I was a candy striper, watched us ink our fingers and press them onto the page. She put her little embossed seal right over both our thumbprints. I kept one original, and I did a very particular thing with it. That detail is the only reason I'm telling you this story today. I tucked it inside a large metal holiday popcorn tin, the one my mother had given me as a Christmas container years before, a red and gold thing with a Santa Claus on the side that played a tinny jingle when you lifted the lid. I used it as decoration in the shop, a little nostalgic touch. I figured it was safe there, a place nobody would ever think to look for legal documents. The first 6 months were all hard work and caramel burns on my forearms. I'd leave for the shop at 4 in the morning to start the kettles. Derek handled marketing and the business side, while I developed the recipes. My nurse's precision turned out to be perfect for small batch confectionery. Temperature control, timing, ingredient ratios measured to the gram. We had a honey sriracha lime flavor that took me 17 test batches before the heat bloomed at the right moment and the lime oil didn't evaporate in the kettle. That one became a local favorite. So did the smoked Gouda and chive, the bourbon maple bacon, the dark chocolate espresso sea salt. But it was a Tuesday afternoon in spring when everything changed. A teenager named Chloe with a TikTok following of about 4,000 people bought a bag of our maple bacon popcorn and filmed her reaction. The video showed her taking a bite, her eyes going wide, and then her screaming at her friends to come try the stuff. It got 14 million views in 3 days. Our online orders went from 15 bags a week to 800 a day. I was in the back stirring a batch when Derek ran in, shoving his phone in my face, shouting, "We're viral, Mom, viral." I didn't even really know what that meant, but I learned fast. We scrambled to hire help to find a larger kitchen to keep up with shipments. I was still nursing the kettles, still the one tasting every batch. Derek was on the phone with distributors, influencers, packaging suppliers, and that's when the quiet shift began. The orders kept climbing. The revenue topped 6 figures. And then one Friday afternoon, Derek sat me down at the shop's little cafe table and slid a stack of papers toward me. He said, "Mom, we need to restructure the business for tax purposes, convert to an S corporation. It's just some dry legal stuff. Sign here and I'll file it." I trusted him. That was my first error. I signed the first page, a generic introductory form, but I told him I wanted to read the rest at home that night because my eyes were tired from the kitchen steam. He got a funny look for a second, then laughed and said, "Sure, take your time." He folded the papers back into his briefcase. I planned to look them over, but we had a 3,000-bag corporate order to fill by Monday, and I worked 18 hours that weekend. And by the time I remembered, he told me he'd already filed everything. It was taken care of. I should have checked. I should have pulled out the papers and read every single clause. But I was exhausted, and he was my son, and surely blood meant something. That was the second error. What I didn't know was that he had taken my signature from that first page, traced it, scanned it, and applied it to a forged dissolution of partnership document, along with a fake notary, stamp from a friend of his who was a notary public with a gambling problem and a willingness to look the other way for a few $100. That one sheet of paper legally severed me from the business, and I had no idea it even existed. 10 days later, I drove to the shop at 7 in the morning with my apron and my recipe notebook, bumping a country radio station, ready to start the cinnamon churro batch. The parking lot was empty. The sign that had said Pop's Kernels was gone. The windows were papered over with a huge printed banner, "Sold to Snack Masters Inc., coming soon." I just sat in my car with the engine running, staring at that banner like it was a foreign language. My chest felt like someone had hooked a ventilator to it and forgotten to turn on the oxygen. I called Derek. No answer. I called Tanya. She picked up and said, "Oh, Martha, just come over to the house, sweetie. We'll explain everything." I drove to their house with my heart hammering in my chest. That nurse's intuition I'd honed over decades now screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. Derek was in the kitchen, leaning against the granite island with a check in his hand. He held it out like it was a gift card for a spa day. "Mom," he said, "that $50,000 order put us on Snack Master's radar. They made an offer on the brand and the recipes. $650,000. I signed the deal yesterday. Here's a little something for you, a family bonus from the sale. $5,000. Go enjoy your retirement." I stared at the check. The zeros seemed to swim. I said, "Derek, I own half that business. We put $120,000 of my pension into it. I have the partnership agreement." He looked at Tanya, who was perched on a stool with her phone in one hand and a matcha latte in the other. And then he looked back at me with something cold in his eyes I had never seen before. "Mom," he said, "that 120 was a gift. You gave it to me to help your son. I put my sweat and vision into this, and I built something valuable. You just stirred popcorn. And as for the partnership, there was a dissolution filed 2 weeks ago. You signed it." I felt the floor drop. I said I didn't sign any dissolution. He shrugged and said, "Well, the paperwork says you did, and it's already processed with the state. The sale is finalized. Now please take the check and don't make this ugly." Tanya added, "Martha, seriously, just take the money. It's more than generous. We're trying to be kind here. I didn't take the check." I drove home in a fog, parked in my driveway, and sat in the living room with the lights off until it got dark. Then I got angry. A cold, methodical anger that felt a lot like the focus I'd bring to a crashing patient. I decided I would go back to the empty shop one last time. I still had a key to the back door, which they'd forgotten to change. The next morning, I let myself in. The kettles were gone, the counters stripped, the shelves bare. All my flavor notebooks were missing. Derek had taken everything that had commercial value. But in the corner, next to a pile of trash bags he'd left for the new owners to deal with, was my mother's holiday tin. The jingle mechanism was broken, so it just clanked dully when I moved it. I pulled off the lid. Inside was old popcorn, the maple bacon kind, now a solid rock of sticky caramel and dust. I almost put it back, but something made me reach into the tin, push through the fossilized snack, and feel around the bottom. My fingers touched a flat manila envelope. I pulled it out, and when I opened it, there was the original notarized partnership agreement, complete with both our signatures, both our inked thumbprints, and Mrs. Pendleton's embossed seal. It was still crisp and legal and utterly valid, and then I turned the paper over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting in blue ink, were the words, "Martha, if the day ever comes when Derek shows you a face you don't recognize, this paper is your shield. Never trust a smile that lingers too long. Save yourself. Love, Mom. I stood in that empty shop, holding that paper, and I could hear her voice so clearly. She had seen something in Derek even back then, some little glint of entitlement he couldn't quite hide, and she had left me a weapon. I tucked the agreement into my coat and wiped my eyes. The mother in me wanted to crumple and sob. The nurse in me started forming a plan. Before I go any further, I want to pause for a moment. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe a mother's intuition and a little piece of paper can take down a con artist, hit like and subscribe right now. Stories like this only happen when someone kept the receipts, and that's exactly what I just found. The next phase was pure theater. I knew that if I came at Derek directly with the original agreement, he would find a way to destroy it or tie it up in court until my remaining savings were gone. I needed him to underestimate me, to think I was a confused old lady who could be managed. So I called him, my voice a little shaky, and apologized for being so stubborn. I told him he was right, the money was just money, and I'd love to take the $5,000 and maybe come stay in their guest house for a while since my own place felt so empty and sad. I played the tragic widow perfectly. Derek predictably saw an opportunity. He said, "Of course, Mom, move in with us, we'll take care of you." Tanya chimed in from the background, "We can keep an eye on you." That's exactly what they did. Keep an eye on me, meaning control my movements. They installed me in their little pool house out back, a converted one-room studio with a kitchenette and a view of their Olympic-sized swimming pool they never used because Tanya was afraid of chlorine fading her hair. They thought they were tucking me away like a piece of old furniture. I played along. I shuffled when I walked. I pretended to forget little things, where I put my glasses, what day the trash went out. I asked the same questions twice. Derek started treating me like a child, patronizing and slow-toned. But at night, when the main house went dark and the pool lights switched to that eerie blue glow, I was wide awake, taking notes on everything I saw and heard. The first flag was a phone call I overheard through the screen door of the guest house. Derek was pacing by the pool, his voice low and rapid. "I'm telling you, transfer it to the Cayman account now before the end of quarter reporting. I don't care about the fee, just move the funds. $650 hits my domestic account, then half goes offshore by tomorrow." I wrote down the time, the date, and the exact phrasing. Nurses are obsessive documenters, it's beaten into us. If you don't chart it, it didn't happen. So I made my own chart. The second flag was visual. Tanya came home 3 days later in a brand new Lexus, a pearl white LS with temporary tags. I knew the trim level because my late husband sold cars for a few years before his health declined. That vehicle retailed north of $70,000. She didn't even park it in the garage, just flounced into the kitchen and waved the key fob around like a ring light. They were spending the sale money with the confidence of people who thought they'd gotten away with a perfect crime. I saw Tanya order custom marble charcuterie boards online, 12 of them at $400 apiece, for a girls' brunch that never happened. I saw Derek pay cash for a Rolex Submariner and leave the receipt on his nightstand, an $8,000 smudge of ink I photographed with my phone through the guest house window while he slept. Every little detail went into my log. I needed physical evidence beyond my notes, so I started making myself useful, which is another tactic people overlook. I fixed things. I'd notice a leaky faucet in the pool house bathroom, and I'd take the aerator apart with my little multi-tool I always carried, clean the calcium deposits out, and put it back together better than before. I fixed a wobbly ceiling fan, a cabinet hinge that squeaked, a drape rod that had slipped out of its bracket. Derek and Tanya were helpless with anything manual. They bought their solutions. So my handiness gave me a plausible reason to be in the main house, to borrow a screwdriver or offer to look at their kitchen disposal. One afternoon, when they were both out for a couple's massage, I went inside to supposedly retrieve a casserole dish they'd borrowed. Their home office door had a simple interior privacy lock, the kind you open with a paperclip if you know how to finesse the tumbler. My late husband had been a tinkerer, and he'd taught me the trick decades ago when we were locked out of our own sunroom. I straightened a large paperclip from their junk drawer, bent a small hook at the end, slid it into the knob hole, and raked the pins gently until I felt the release. It took me maybe 90 seconds. The door swung open onto a home office that smelled like sandalwood and fresh ink. I didn't touch the computer yet. I went for the filing cabinet in the corner, a big 4-drawer unit with a cheap cylinder lock. I looked around the room, checking for obvious hiding spots, and remembered an old trick from a true crime show. I pulled out books from the shelf, one by one, until I found a hollowed-out law textbook with a small brass key inside. Textbook, indeed. The key opened the filing cabinet. Inside, hanging folders labeled with neat printed tabs, I found the complete paper trail of my betrayal. The first document was the forged dissolution of partnership. It bore my supposedly witnessed signature on the last page, a signature that was a patchy, slightly wavering copy of my real one, the kind you get when someone traces from light through a window. Next to it was a notary stamp and signature from a woman named Renee Hollies. I photographed it on my phone. The next file was the asset purchase agreement with Snack Masters, a 28-page contract with a closing price of $650,000, paid into an account number I recognized from Derek's earlier mumbling. It was his personal checking, not the business account. There was also a wire transfer confirmation sending half of that, $325,000, to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under a shell company called DPT Holdings. I took close-up shots of every page, every routing number, every date. I also found a folder of our original business paperwork. In it was the fake S Corporation conversion form, the one he'd supposedly filed with my signature. But tucked in the back was a piece of paper I'd completely forgotten, a copy of the original partnership agreement. He'd kept a copy in his files, and it clearly showed the notary seal and our thumbprints, so his own records contradicted the dissolution. He'd gotten lazy. I photographed that too, quietly, methodically, like I was charting vitals on a crashing patient. No panic, just procedure. I also found a thank you card from Renee Hollies, the notary, thumbtacked to the wall above his desk. It read, "Derek, pleasure doing business. Let me know if you need any more adjustments." I photographed that as well. The handwriting matched the forged notary journal entry I glimpsed in a scan. I locked everything back up, returned the key to its hollow book, closed the office door, and slipped back to the guest house with my phone full of evidence. I knew I needed an ally on the outside, someone with authority who could move faster than a civil lawsuit. Through a former nursing colleague whose son worked in corporate law, I got the name of a woman named Carla Mendoza. She was the compliance officer at Snack Masters, the person responsible for making sure acquisitions didn't blow up in the company's face. I called her from a burner phone I'd bought at a big box store that afternoon, using the excuse that I'd lost my cell phone charger and needed a temporary device. Nurses plan for contingencies. Carla was cautious at first, but when I described the forged dissolution and mentioned the Cayman account, her tone shifted. She said, "Mrs. Voss, if what you're saying is true, the entire sale is based on a fraudulent document. We would void it immediately and pursue legal action against your son for misrepresentation. But I need rock-solid proof, not just photos. I need the original agreement with the notary seal, and ideally, a recorded admission from your son that he forged the documents. Can you get that?" I told her I could. She said, "I'm going to loop in our legal team and the Federal Trade Commission investigators. If he moved that money across borders with fraudulent intent, that's wire fraud, and the feds love a wire fraud case with a paper trail." I hung up, and that cold, methodical focus settled deeper into my bones. I'd helped code patients in the ICU. I could certainly help code my son's financial future. Carla emailed me secure copies of the fraudulent dissolution and purchase agreement for my own records, and we set up a timeline. She told me the bank, where the transaction was processed, had a fraud officer ready to cooperate if I could get Derek to confirm the forgery in front of witnesses. That meant I needed a confession, live and recorded. The next step was the maximum cruelty test. I needed to know if there was any shred of humanity left in Derek, any filament of love for the woman who'd birthed him and bankrolled his dream, before I dropped the anvil on his head. So I set up a small performance. I bought a little prop from a medical supply store, a portable vial of saline and a tiny squeeze bulb, the kind you see in television shows when someone fakes a heart attack. I taped the bulb to my palm under my sleeve. On a Sunday afternoon when I knew they'd be home, I walked into the main house kitchen while they were unloading groceries. I started breathing a little heavily, clutching the doorframe. I said, "Derek, I'm not feeling right, my chest is tight." I leaned against the counter, then slid dramatically to the tile floor, the bulb hissing a fine mist of saline onto my face so I looked clammy. I let my body go slack. For about 4 seconds, nothing happened. I heard the crinkle of a plastic grocery bag. Then Tanya's voice, flat as a pancake. Is she faking? I think she's faking. And Derek, my son, my only child, stepped right over my outstretched arm, his loafer brushing my knuckles, and yanked open the drawer where he kept his checkbooks and keys. I can't deal with this right now. I have a wire deadline, he said. His voice was irritated, like I was a loose dog blocking his driveway. Tanya said, should I call someone? Derek snapped, just get her a glass of water or something. She'll be fine. She's always dramatic. No one touched my pulse. No one dialed 911. I lay there, feeling the cold tile through my pants, and I let the saline drops roll down my temple. And after a full minute, I moaned softly and stirred, and Tanya handed me a lukewarm bottle of water without even looking at my face. I mumbled something about low blood sugar and shuffled back to the guest house. That was the moment. The filament snapped. There was no sun left in that house, only a thief wearing a familiar face. As I closed the pool house door, I felt not grief, but a clean, surgical emptiness, the same feeling I got before a difficult procedure. No hesitation, just preparation. 3 days later, I had my recording. I told Derek I wanted to take him out to dinner to thank him for letting me stay, and I'd realized he was right about the popcorn shop. Maybe I was too old for business anyway. He preened like a peacock. At the restaurant, I used a small audio recorder hidden in my jacket lining, the kind that picks up conversation even through fabric. Over gluten-free pasta that Tanya insisted on, I said, Derek, I'm just so grateful you handled all that legal stuff. I could never have figured out that dissolution paperwork myself. He smirked, chewed, and said, Mom, it's so easy. You just need to know the right people. Renee, my notary girl, she backdated the thing for $500. And the signature was simple. I just traced yours from the original S-Corp form and scanned it. The bank never even checked. Tanya laughed and said, Babe, don't tell her all our secrets. She's too pure. Derek said, she's my mom. She won't say anything. Right, Mom? I smiled sweetly and said, of course not, sweetheart. You're so clever. The recorder captured every word, every clink of forks, every smug syllable. I had him on recording confessing to forgery, bribery of a notary, and financial fraud. That night, I uploaded the file to a secure cloud drive, made 2 backups, and sent 1 copy to Carla with a brief message. He just sang the whole area. The confrontation happened at the bank. Derek had arranged a meeting under the guise of setting up a trust fund for me, a little retirement account he said would provide for me in my golden years. What he actually needed was my signature on a release of all claims against the business sale, a legal waiver that would close any loopholes Snack Masters might use to claw back the deal. He thought I was too dotty to read it. The morning of the appointment, I dressed carefully, a pressed navy blouse, my mother's pearl earrings. I put the original partnership agreement in a sealed envelope inside my purse. I texted Carla from the burner phone. It's on. She replied, Federal marshals are already at the branch, plainclothes. We've got the bank's fraud officer on standby. Just get him to say the quiet part out loud one more time. At the bank, we were ushered into a wood-paneled conference room. A young banker named Marcus sat across from us, a folder opened in front of him. Derek slid a thick document toward me. All right, Mom, he said, just sign where I've highlighted. This is all standard stuff. I won't bore you with the details. I picked up the pen. I looked at the document, which was titled Mutual Release and Indemnification, and I set the pen down. Derek, I said, my voice suddenly steady and clear. No tremor, no shuffle, I just want to be sure this is the right thing. I mean, you sold the business fair and square, right? You had all the proper paperwork, my signature, everything legal. He waved his hand dismissively. Yes, Mom, I told you the dissolution was fully notarized, everything's airtight. You don't need to worry about it. I leaned forward a little. And that notary, what was her name again? He glanced at Marcus uncomfortably. Renee Hollies, I think. Why does it matter? I said, because I just want to check something. And I pulled the original partnership agreement out of my purse and laid it flat on the table. The color drained from his face like fluid out of a ruptured line. His eyes went to the embossed notary seal, the 2 thumbprints, the date. He tried to reach for it, but I slid it back toward me. Marcus, the banker, looked bewildered. I said this, gentlemen, is an original notarized partnership agreement dated 18 months before any supposed dissolution. The dissolution on file bears a fake notary stamp from a woman who accepted a bribe, and a traced signature that a handwriting analyst will dismantle in 5 minutes. You, Derek, have also committed wire fraud by transferring proceeds of a fraudulent sale to an offshore account in the Caymans. And just for the record, That little recording from our Italian dinner last Thursday is already with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I stood up. Marcus, I'm so sorry you got caught in this, but you might want to call your bank's legal counsel now, because federal marshals are in your lobby waiting to arrest my son. The conference room door opened, and two men in suits stepped in. Derek bolted out of his chair, but the door was already blocked. He was handcuffed that very moment, the metal cuffs clicking shut around the wrists that had stirred so many batches of kettle corn. Tanya, who was waiting in the Lexus outside, was also taken in for conspiracy. I watched them lead him away. He looked back at me once, his face a mixture of fury and utter disbelief, like the flower arrangement had just bit him. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My mother had said everything for me, years ago, on the back of that agreement. The aftermath took about 14 months to fully settle, but the consequences were swift and concrete. The Snack Masters deal was voided in its entirety. Because the forfeiture clause in the fraudulent contract allowed them to pursue damages, they went after Derek and Tanya's personal assets to recover their legal costs, and the $75,000 they'd already sunk into branding materials. The Cayman account was frozen and repatriated by the IRS. Derek pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of forgery, and he was sentenced to 24 months in federal prison plus 3 years supervised release. Tanya took a plea for conspiracy and got 18 months of house arrest, probation, and community service. She ended up having to sell the Lexus and most of her handbags. I will admit I felt a little flutter of satisfaction when the bank's report showed her credit card debt had climbed above $40,000 because they'd been spending the stolen money before it even cleared. Their house went into foreclosure. I didn't try to save it. Some fires shouldn't be put out, but here is where the story curves into something poetic. A few months after Derek's sentencing, I got a call from Carla at Snack Masters. She said, "Martha, our CEO would like to make a gesture. The acquisition attempt was a mess, but the brand still has value, and honestly, the story of your recovery has gotten a lot of press. We'd like to return the business to you, free and clear, along with a settlement of $100,000 for the distress and the forgery. We'll even fund a small relaunch campaign if you're willing to keep the existing recipes and the shop location." I said yes, but I changed the name. The day I reopened, the sign above the door read Kernel of Deceit popcorn, painted in vintage gold lettering on a deep burgundy background. Inside, the centerpiece of the shop is the same huge copper kettle we'd always used, polished to a mirror shine. And here is the detail that makes people drive from 3 states over to buy a bag. As part of Derek's supervised release conditions, the judge ordered he perform 600 hours of community service, and the court approved my proposal. He works those hours in the very shop he tried to steal. He arrives every morning at 7, wearing a bright neon yellow polo shirt I had printed. With the words "Pop goes the lies" across the back in bold black letters. He stirs the kettle drums, scoops the caramel, shovels the cheese dust, while customers take selfies with him in the background. And every single bag of popcorn we sell, from the cheddar jalapeno to the truffle parmesan, has a custom printed sticker on the front. A little gavel icon and the case number of his perjury and fraud docket, complete with a QR code that links to the public federal court records. Parents love it. They tell their kids, "See that man stirring the corn." He stole from his own mother, and now he has to make popcorn forever. The shirts are so famous now that we actually sell duplicates in the gift section. I donate those proceeds to a nonprofit that helps seniors avoid financial scams. Derek rarely looks up from the kettle, but when he does, he sees the framed note from my mother on the wall, the one that says, "Do not trust a smile that lingers too long," and he knows exactly why it's there. I think about my mother a lot. I keep her holiday tin on the counter next to the register, still a little dented, still crusted with that ancient maple bacon fossil. Real family does not steal your life savings and call it a bonus. Real family does not step over you when you're on the floor. And if they do, well, you make sure you're holding the original copy of the truth. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I know there are a lot of popcorn fans out there who have their own kernels of truth to share. If you appreciated this tale of sweet, caramel-coated justice, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We've got more stories just like this one, about people who thought they could outsmart the quiet ones and learned that the quiet ones keep the loudest receipts. I'll see you in the next story.